The theater smelled faintly of old wood and varnish. Dust floated in tiny golden beams from the overhead lights, and the air carried the quiet hum of anticipation. Rehearsals had been going on for weeks, and everyone knew this was not just another ordinary day. Today, the director, a man whose reputation for being tough and unpredictable spread even outside the theater, had something special or terrifying planned. Alex, a young musician with a love for the piano that ran deeper than anyone could see, sat quietly in a corner of the room. His fingers, long and nimble, tapped absently on the edge of his notebook, tracing invisible melodies. He had always loved music more than anything else, but performing in front of people, especially when everyone's expectations were high, made his heart race. He wasn't afraid of failure. At least he tried not to be. But the kind of pressure this director created was different. It was sharp, exacting, and somehow personal. The other performers were gathered near the center of the room, whispering to each other in low tones. They had seen many people come and go under this director's watch. Some thrived, some broke, and some disappeared quietly without explanation. There was a mixture of awe and fear in their voices. "Today will be different," someone muttered. "He's going to test someone like never before." Alex didn't say anything. He knew who would be chosen eventually. Somehow he had a feeling it might be him. He had been practicing for weeks in secret, preparing for something he couldn't yet name. Most of his peers didn't notice the long hours he spent after rehearsals, or the small private concerts he held in empty classrooms where he let himself lose in the music. Then the director arrived. He didn't announce himself with words. His presence alone filled the room. He moved with a quiet confidence that demanded attention, though he rarely raised his voice. When he finally spoke, everyone turned instantly. "Good morning," he said, but his voice had that unusual weight that made it feel like more than a greeting. "Today, someone is going to show me something unexpected. Someone is going to step forward and take a risk that will leave the room changed." A hush fell over everyone. Some of the performers shifted nervously. The director's eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, until they landed on Alex. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, curved his lips. "You," he said. "Play if you dare." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Alex felt a sharp jolt of adrenaline. His stomach twisted with a mix of fear and excitement. He had been waiting for a chance like this, though he had never admitted it to anyone, not even himself. But the weight of everyone's eyes and the silent judgment in their expressions made him hesitate. The director leaned casually against a chair, watching, waiting. "I want to see courage," he said softly. "I want to see what you're truly capable of." "Nothing less," Alex swallowed. He glanced at the piano across the room. Its polished surface reflected the lights, gleaming as if aware of the drama it was about to host. His fingers twitched involuntarily. He could almost hear the notes calling him, whispering promises of triumph or failure. The whispers in the room grew louder. Some were supportive, some skeptical. "Do you think he'll do it?" One performer asked another. "He looks nervous." "Nervous?" The other replied. Anyone would be nervous with this man staring at them like that. "I've seen people freeze completely." Alex forced himself to breathe. He thought about all the hours he had poured into practice, the late nights when everyone else slept, the quiet mornings when he played alone to perfect the notes no one would ever hear. Music had been his sanctuary, his only true friend. And now it demanded courage he didn't know he had. He took a step toward the piano. The room seemed to shrink around him, every chair, every face, every shadow pressing inward. He felt the weight of expectation, of scrutiny, but he also felt something else. A spark, a small but fierce light deep inside that refused to be extinguished. "Go on," the director said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried an authority that made it impossible to argue. "Let's see what you've got." Alex sat down. The bench was cool beneath him. He placed his hands over the keys. At first they hovered, uncertain, as if waiting for permission. Then slowly, deliberately, he pressed a single note. It rang out clear and honest, filling the space with its sound. A few eyes widened. The director's expression remained unreadable, but something in the air shifted. The note hung for a moment, then faded, leaving behind an expectant silence. Alex drew a deep breath and began again. This time the music started to flow, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Each note told a story, a fragment of his journey, the fears and hopes he had carried alone. He played a melody that seemed familiar to no one but him, a melody that drew everyone in without them realizing it. Heads turned, eyes softened, and the whispers faded into quiet awe. The director leaned forward slightly. For a moment he seemed almost human, almost moved, though he gave nothing away. Alex's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a skill that surprised even him. He felt free, liberated, like the piano and he were one. The challenge no longer felt impossible. It felt inevitable, as though this moment had been waiting for him all his life. Outside the room, the city moved on without knowing what was happening inside. But within these walls, time slowed. Every person in the room felt it, the tension, the possibility, the unspoken understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding. And then, just as Alex was beginning to feel he might falter, he remembered why he was there. This wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about proving to himself that he could rise to the moment, that he could be brave even when fear threatened to take over. The notes grew bolder, louder, more confident. The music filled the corners of the theater, spilling into the hearts of everyone present. The director finally straightened, his eyes sharp and assessing, but something had changed. He was no longer just a critic. He was a witness. Alex didn't notice the looks of astonishment spreading across the faces around him. He didn't hear the soft gasps, the quickening breaths. All he knew was the music and the fire it ignited inside him. For the first time he felt fully alive, fully seen, fully capable. Minutes passed like seconds and the melody wound its way to a gentle, lingering conclusion. Alex's fingers lifted from the keys, hovering as the final note faded into silence. The room remained still, suspended in a moment that felt eternal. Then slowly the director clapped. It was a single, deliberate clap, not a burst of applause, but enough to break the spell. The sound echoed in the theater and everyone else joined, filling the room with the warmth of recognition and respect. Alex exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and triumph. His hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was exhilaration. He had faced the challenge, played if he dared, and the world had not ended. In fact, it had changed, if only a little, because of him. The director's eyes met his. For the first time, there was a hint of something that could almost be called approval. Not bad, he said simply. Not bad at all. You may have something worth watching after all. The room buzzed with energy as performers whispered among themselves, some in admiration, some in disbelief. Alex stood, feeling the strange mixture of exhaustion and elation that only comes from giving everything you have to something you love. As the lights dimmed and the rehearsal continued, Alex couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. He knew this was only the beginning. The challenge had been met, but the journey was far from over. And deep inside he felt ready to face whatever came next. Because he had discovered something important, courage, and the music that lived inside him, waiting to be heard. After the rehearsal, the theater slowly emptied. Some performers lingered, whispering in small clusters about what had just happened. Alex remained behind alone, sitting on the piano bench. The echoes of the music still lingered in his mind, a soft hum that refused to fade. It was strange to feel so alive and exhausted at the same time. His fingers, which had danced across the keys just moments ago, now lay still, almost numb, but in a good way. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the polished surface of the piano. The applause and the claps from the director still rang in his ears. Alex had done something he wasn't sure he could do, and yet he had. He had faced the gaze of judgment, the silent pressure of expectation, and he had played anyway. Alone in the quiet room, he allowed himself a small, private smile, but the quiet was short-lived. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, slow and deliberate. Alex lifted his head and saw one of the other performers, a tall woman with careful eyes and an easy confidence. Approaching. "You were incredible," she said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the magic of what had just happened. I didn't expect that at all." Alex shrugged, trying to look casual, but the heat of embarrassment rose in his cheeks. "It's just music," he said softly. "I just played what I felt." She shook her head. "No, that was more than just music. You put everything into it. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it." Alex nodded, unsure how to respond. He had never been the type to seek praise, yet hearing it now felt different. It wasn't just empty words, it carried truth. And in that truth, a seed of confidence began to grow. As she walked away, Alex glanced back at the empty theater. Soon the janitors would arrive to clean, and the room would return to its normal quiet, a room where countless notes had been played, but few had ever mattered. He knew, though, that today was different. Something inside him had changed, and he wasn't entirely sure what it meant yet. That night, Alex sat in his small apartment, the piano in the corner untouched. He stared at it, thinking about the director, the challenge, and the performance. There were moments during the music when he felt weightless, moments when it was as if he was floating above the keys, carried by something bigger than himself. And then there were moments when fear crept in, the thought of failing, of disappointing everyone, of being judged too harshly. He closed his eyes and replayed the performance in his mind. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift of rhythm. He remembered the gasps, the silence, the final clap, and then he thought about what might come next. The director had given him a rare acknowledgement, a hint of approval, but nothing more. He knew that this was only the first step. The next challenge would be harder, more demanding, more personal. Sleep came slowly that night, and Alex dreamed of music that spoke without words. In the dream, the theater was enormous, stretching into shadows that seemed endless. The piano keys gleamed like silver, and he moved across them with a speed and grace he didn't know he possessed. The notes filled the air, weaving through unseen corners, reaching ears that were listening in silence. Yet somewhere in the distance, the director's voice whispered, "Do more. Show me more." Morning came with the kind of gray light that made the city outside look flat and uninviting. Alex forced himself out of bed, ate a quick breakfast, and headed back to the theater. Even though he had played his best, he knew he had to continue. Talent alone was never enough. It was dedication, persistence, and courage that shaped a true performer. The theater was already busy when he arrived. Performers were warming up, tuning instruments, and exchanging quiet words of encouragement. Alex noticed a few lingering glances in his direction, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and perhaps a hint of envy. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the piano waiting for him in the corner. The director arrived shortly after. His presence carried the same quiet authority as always. No one dared to speak first. He walked across the room, observing, his eyes flicking over each performer like a hawk. Then, without warning, he stopped in front of Alex. "Yesterday was interesting," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "But talent is only the beginning. You have to prove it every day. Are you ready for the real test?" Alex swallowed, feeling his heart thump in his chest. He had expected challenges, but the director's tone suggested something far beyond what he had imagined. "I'm ready," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The director nodded once and moved on, leaving Alex with a mixture of anticipation and unease. The other performers began their exercises, but Alex's mind was elsewhere. He thought about what the real test could mean. Would it be a solo performance? A complex piece he had never seen before? Or something more personal? Something that might push him beyond the limits of comfort? During the first rehearsal of the day, the director called everyone together. He handed out sheets of music, each piece more complicated than the last. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he studied the notes. The technical difficulty alone would challenge even the most experienced performers. But it wasn't just about playing the notes correctly. The director demanded emotion, interpretation, and risk. There were no shortcuts. There was no hiding. Hours passed in a blur. Alex practiced tirelessly, making small mistakes, correcting them, adjusting phrasing, experimenting with dynamics. He felt his body grow weary, but his mind remained alert. Every time he played a passage perfectly, a thrill surged through him. Every time he faltered, a wave of frustration followed, yet he pushed forward. During a short break, a few performers approached him again. "You're fearless," one whispered. "I don't know how you do it." Alex shook his head. "I'm not fearless. I'm just stubborn, I guess." They laughed softly, but Alex could see that they understood. Fear was there, always. The difference was whether you let it control you or used it to drive you forward. The afternoon rehearsal brought a new challenge. The director had set up a small stage in the center of the room and asked each performer to improvise, to take a piece of music and make it their own in front of everyone else. Alex's stomach turned. Improvisation was difficult even under normal circumstances, but doing it here with the director watching felt almost impossible. He sat at the piano, hands hovering over the keys. The room fell silent. Every eye was on him. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the first note fall. It was shaky at first, uncertain, but then he found a rhythm, a flow, a story in the notes. The music spoke not just to the room but to him. And for the first time, he felt that the challenge was not about impressing anyone else. It was about expressing the truth of his own journey. As he played, he noticed subtle shifts in the room. The whispers stopped. The skeptical glances vanished. Even the director's stern expression softened just slightly. Alex's confidence grew with each measure. He experimented, taking risks, weaving in unexpected harmonies, letting his intuition guide him. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a moment, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Then slowly applause began. It was not the polite, obligatory clapping of colleagues, it was genuine, filled with admiration and surprise. Alex exhaled deeply, relief and pride mingling inside him. The director approached again. His gaze was piercing, searching. He didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly. That single gesture carried more meaning than any words could. It said, "You have potential. You have courage. You have something rare." But it also said, "This is just the beginning." Alex left the rehearsal that evening exhausted but inspired. His mind replayed the day's events over and over. He thought about the challenges ahead, the risk, the possibility of failure, and the thrill of achievement. He knew the path would be difficult, but for the first time he felt ready to walk it step by step. That night, as he lay in bed, Alex couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the music, about the moments when he had felt weightless, about the director's watchful eyes. Fear was still there, always present, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had become a companion, a reminder that the journey was real. That courage was needed every day. He made a promise to himself. No matter how difficult the next challenge, no matter how high the expectations, he would face it. He would play, even if it terrified him. He would take risks, even if failure seemed certain. And above all, he would stay true to the music that lived inside him. The music that no one could take away. And as sleep finally took him, Alex dreamed again of the theater, of the piano, of the endless possibilities waiting just beyond the keys. The following morning, the theater felt different. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows was soft but golden, touching the dust particles that floated lazily in the air. There was a sense of expectation, subtle but tangible, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Alex walked in, carrying his small bag of sheet music and notebooks, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. He wasn't alone for long. Other performers trickled in, chatting quietly, adjusting instruments and practicing scales. Some threw him curious glances, still remembering the previous day's performance. A few whispered to each other, casting sly smiles or shaking their heads in disbelief. Alex noticed, but he didn't respond. He had learned that reactions didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the moment, and the courage to step into it fully. The director arrived shortly after, as he always did, moving with that calm authority that demanded attention without a single raised voice. He paused at the center of the room and let his gaze sweep over everyone, lingering on Alex just long enough to send a familiar jolt of adrenaline through him. "Today," the director said, his voice deliberate and slow, "we take the next step. Talent has been shown, courage has been tested, but now it is time for authenticity. I want to see your music, not as it should be played, but as it is in your heart." The words made the room feel heavier, almost pressing down on Alex. Authenticity. The idea was simple, but in practice it was terrifying. To play exactly what one felt, without filters, without polish, without hiding, was to expose oneself completely. It was a risk few were willing to take. The director moved to a small stage at the front of the room. A piano sat there, polished and ready. "Alex," he said, "you will go first." Alex's heart raced. He had been preparing, practicing, and dreaming about this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of the expectation was almost unbearable. He approached the stage slowly, every step echoing in the quiet room. The other performers had stopped their warm-ups, standing in silence, their eyes fixed on him. He sat at the piano bench and placed his hands over the keys. They trembled slightly. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his mind center. The first note he played was soft, tentative, almost shy. It filled the room, reverberating off the walls, gentle but certain. At first he played cautiously, feeling the edges of the melody, testing the space, letting the room respond. But soon he began to lose himself in the music. Each note was not just sound, It was thought, memory, and feeling made tangible. He thought about the long nights he had spent alone, practicing in small apartments, empty classrooms, and quiet corners. He thought about the times he had doubted himself, the times he had wanted to give up, and the small, persistent voice that had pushed him forward. Slowly, the melody grew bolder. It rose and fell like a living thing, carrying with it a sense of story. The notes told of struggle and fear, of moments of hesitation and of triumph born from persistence. Alex's fingers moved with increasing confidence, flowing over the keys as if guided by something beyond him. The room was silent. Every performer, every crew member, even the director himself watched intently. The music demanded attention not through complexity, but through honesty. There were no tricks, no technical flourishes meant to impress. It was pure, unfiltered emotion, raw and compelling. Midway through the performance, Alex allowed himself to take a risk. He began to improvise, creating unexpected harmonies and rhythms that had never been rehearsed. The notes wove through the air unpredictably, a story unfolding in real time. A soft gasp escaped from one of the performers. The director's eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating as he observed every movement of Alex's hands. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Alex continued. He felt an odd sense of liberation as the improvisation took over, guiding his hands as much as he guided it. The music became larger than himself, filling the theater, wrapping around the audience, and seeping into the walls. He felt a connection with every person in the room, though he had never seen them all so clearly. The director leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Alex sensed a flicker of emotion there, interest, curiosity, perhaps even surprise. He played on, letting himself be vulnerable, letting the notes carry the weight of his emotions. The final passage approached, and he felt his heart swell. He struck the last chord deliberately, holding it as long as he could, letting it resonate through the room. Silence followed, the kind of silence that feels heavy yet filled with awe. The music had stopped, but its echo remained in the hearts of everyone present. Alex exhaled slowly, feeling drained yet exhilarated. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment longer, reluctant to leave the space where the music had lived. Then slowly, the applause began. It was not immediate and it was not uniform, but it grew steadily, rising like a wave. Performers clapped softly at first, then louder. The director's single, deliberate clap followed, measured and powerful, carrying more weight than all the others combined. Alex stood, feeling a rush of emotion he couldn't fully name. Pride, relief, exhilaration, and a strange sense of connection all mixed together. The director approached him. His expression remained mostly neutral, but there was a subtle change, a hint of acknowledgement that was rare and precious. "You played honestly," the director said simply. "That is worth more than perfection." Alex nodded, unable to speak at first. Words felt small compared to what had just happened. He felt seen, truly seen, in a way that few ever experienced. And yet he also knew this was only the beginning. Authenticity was a path, not a destination. The challenges ahead would demand more than skill. They would demand courage, honesty, and heart. The next few hours passed in a blur. Other performers took their turns, each challenged to find their own voice, to play not as expected, but as themselves. Alex watched, learning, listening, and silently encouraging. He noticed the struggles, the moments of hesitation, the small sparks of brilliance. It reminded him that courage was not about being fearless, but about continuing despite fear. Between rehearsals, Alex walked through the empty theater, letting the echoes of his performance linger in the corners. He touched the polished wood of the piano, feeling its cool surface beneath his fingers. He thought about the journey he had taken to get here, the countless small sacrifices and quiet victories that had prepared him for this moment. Each step had mattered. Each moment of persistence had shaped him into someone capable of taking risks and being seen. By the evening, the rehearsal space had emptied except for a few performers who lingered to practice. Alex sat at the piano once more, not for a formal performance, but simply to play. The music poured out, unhurried and unplanned, carrying with it the lessons of the day. Each note felt like a conversation with himself, a reflection of the courage he was learning to cultivate. The director's words echoed in his mind: authenticity over perfection. Alex understood them more deeply now. Playing honestly was not easy. It was terrifying. It exposed flaws, vulnerabilities, and fears. But it was also liberating. In honesty, there was power. In risk, there was growth. As he left the theater that night, the city lights stretched before him, faintly flickering against the dark sky. Alex felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. He had taken a step forward, faced the challenge, and discovered something essential. That true music came from within, and that courage meant showing it even when the world might not understand. Walking home, he thought about tomorrow, about the challenges yet to come, and about the risk and reward of stepping into the unknown. He felt ready, not because he was perfect, but because he had learned that fear was not an enemy but a companion on the journey. That night, sleep arrived gently. Alex dreamed of the piano, of music stretching endlessly into shadows and light, and of a theater filled with possibility. For the first time, he understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth every note, every risk, every moment of courage. And with that understanding, he drifted into a deep, restful sleep, ready to face whatever awaited him the next day. The next morning, the theater was alive with a quiet tension that felt almost electric. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. But the light did little to ease the weight that hung over the room. Every performer knew today would be different. Today, the director's challenge would reach its peak. Everyone had felt the subtle shift in expectation, the unspoken sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that might change everything. Alex arrived early, as always carrying his music notebooks and a quiet determination. He had rehearsed all night in his mind, replaying every note, every passage, every improvisation from the previous days. But even with preparation, the uncertainty gnawed at him. The director had a way of pushing people to the edge, and Alex knew that what awaited him might demand more than skill. It might demand his entire courage, his entire heart. Other performers trickled in, whispering quietly, exchanging glances and testing instruments. Some smiled politely at Alex, their admiration mingled with awe. Others avoided eye contact, uncertain whether to encourage or to be wary. The tension was palpable. Alex felt it pressing against his chest, heavy but strangely motivating. The director arrived shortly after, moving through the room like a shadow with purpose. His eyes scanned the performers, resting briefly on each face before finally landing on Alex. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though it did not reach his eyes. The weight of expectation was immediate, as if the director's gaze alone could measure talent, fear, and courage all at once. Today, the director began, his voice calm but sharp. You will not play for approval. You will not play for praise. You will play for truth, and you will do so in a way none of you have ever dared before. A collective shiver passed through the room. The other performers exchanged nervous glances. The phrase, in a way none of you have ever dared before, was loaded with challenge, with threat, with possibility. Alex felt his stomach twist with anticipation and anxiety. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the stage, each step echoing in the quiet theater. He sat at the piano, the polished keys gleaming beneath the soft light. He placed his hands over them, hesitated, and then drew a deep breath. The first note fell softly, almost tentatively. He felt every eye in the room upon him, every heartbeat synchronized with his own. The music began slowly, cautiously, yet each note carried intention, carrying meaning beyond the sheet music, beyond technique. As he played, Alex allowed himself to feel, to connect with every memory, every emotion he had ever poured into music. The melody grew richer, deeper, flowing like a river that refused to be constrained. His fingers moved with confidence now, guided by instinct and emotion rather than conscious thought. The room seemed to shrink, focusing entirely on the piano and the story Alex was telling. Then came the moment of risk. Alex had prepared for this, though only in fragments, improvising ideas he hoped would carry the weight of the director's challenge. He shifted the melody, adding notes no one expected, weaving harmonies that rose and fell unpredictably. Gasps escaped quietly from some of the performers. The director's expression, for the first time, showed something like curiosity, a faint spark of recognition that Alex had never seen before. With each passing moment, the music became bolder. Alex leaned into the improvisation, letting intuition guide him. The rhythm shifted. Dynamic changes surged unexpectedly and the melody transformed, almost as if it had taken on a life of its own. The room was silent, everyone entranced. Every ear, every gaze, every heart was drawn into the unfolding story. Alex could feel exhaustion creeping into his limbs, but he ignored it. The music demanded continuation, demanded honesty, demanded risk. The final section approached, and he allowed himself to pour everything he had into the notes. Fear, hope, doubt, joy, all tangled together in a raw, unfiltered expression. Then, as he struck the final chord, the unexpected happened. One note lingered, trembling in the air, and Alex, carried by instinct, added a flourish that had never been practiced, never even imagined. It resonated deep and full, and the silence that followed was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was a silence of awe, of disbelief, of recognition. The room seemed to hold its breath. The director leaned forward, eyes wide, hand hovering as if unsure whether to clap or remain still. He was no longer the detached, critical observer. Something in Alex's performance had caught him off guard, moved him in a way that few performers ever had. Alex, unaware of the impact he had made, simply let the final note fade, releasing it into the quiet that had become almost sacred. Then slowly, applause began. At first tentative, cautious, but it grew, building steadily like a wave until the entire room resonated with admiration. The performers clapped, some shaking their heads in amazement. Crew members who had been quietly observing from the back stood, unable to restrain their appreciation. And the director, the most critical of all, stood still for a long moment before finally clapping. His single clap echoed powerfully through the theater, deliberate and commanding, yet filled with a weight of acknowledgement that went far beyond mere words. Alex rose from the piano bench, chest heaving, sweat dampening his shirt. Relief, pride, exhilaration, and disbelief collided within him. He had faced the challenge fully, taken risks, and created something unforgettable. But more than that, he had played truthfully, without hiding, without holding back, without fear. And the reaction from the room confirmed that it had been enough. The director approached him slowly, studying him as if he were both a mystery and a revelation. "That was unexpected," he said finally, his voice measured but unmistakably impressed. "You took a risk most would never dare, and you succeeded because you played with honesty. Remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to be truly seen." Alex could barely speak. He nodded, unable to fully articulate the mixture of emotions swirling inside him. The weight of approval, the validation of courage, and the thrill of achievement were overwhelming. Yet beneath it all was a quiet understanding. This was not the end. This was a turning point, a moment that opened the door to further challenges, to deeper exploration, to continued growth. For the rest of the day, the atmosphere in the theater was charged with energy. Other performers, inspired by Alex's courage and skill, attempted bolder improvisations. The director watched with keen interest, occasionally making notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow in surprise. The room vibrated with creativity and determination, each person pushing themselves further than they had thought possible. Between rehearsals, Alex wandered through the theater alone, letting the echoes of his performance linger. He touched the piano keys gently, remembering the way each note had felt beneath his fingers, the way the music had carried him forward, the way the room had responded. He realized that the turning point was not just about recognition or applause. It was about understanding his own capacity for courage, creativity, and authenticity. As evening approached, the theater emptied once more, leaving Alex in quiet reflection. He sat at the piano one last time, not to perform, but simply to connect with the music that had carried him through the day. He played softly, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. The room seemed to listen, as though it remembered every risk, every flourish, every moment of honesty. That night, Alex walked home slowly, the city lights casting long shadows on the streets. He thought about the events of the day, the risk he had taken, the applause, the director's acknowledgement. He realized that courage was not a single moment, but a series of choices repeated every day. Each time he faced fear and moved forward anyway, he grew stronger, braver, more capable. Sleep eventually came, but it was filled with vivid dreams of music. He imagined himself on an endless stage, notes cascading around him, every challenge pushing him to new heights, every risk opening doors to possibilities he had never imagined. He felt alive in a way that was both exhausting and exhilarating, knowing that the journey was far from over, but confident that he could meet it with honesty and courage. By the time morning arrived, Alex was ready. The turning point had come and he had faced it fully. He understood now that the true challenge was not about perfection, applause, or approval. It was about daring to be seen, daring to play truthfully, daring to take risks when the stakes were highest. And with that understanding, he stepped into the new day, ready for whatever awaited him, ready to continue the path he had chosen with courage, heart, and unwavering determination. The morning air was crisp as Alex walked to the theater, carrying only his notebooks and a quiet determination that had grown stronger with each passing day. Today was different. He could feel it in the rhythm of his steps, in the subtle weight of anticipation that hovered around him like a thin veil. The events of the past days had built up to this moment. Every risk he had taken, every note he had played with courage had led here. The theater was already alive with activity. Performers were warming up, tuning instruments, whispering to each other in low voices. There was a sense of excitement mixed with tension, a feeling that today would not be ordinary. Alex walked through the space, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and anticipation, and settled near the piano he had come to know so intimately. The director arrived shortly after, moving across the room with his usual calm authority. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the performers, lingering on Alex. The look in his eyes was different today, less judgmental, more observant, as if he were measuring not only skill but also courage, resilience, and heart. "Today," the director said, his voice steady and commanding, "we take everything you have learned and tested and put it to the ultimate measure. Talent, courage, and honesty have been shown. Now it is time to see what happens when you combine all three under pressure." The room went quiet. Even the faintest movement seemed amplified. Alex felt his heartbeat quicken. He had been preparing, practicing, imagining this moment, but now that it had arrived, the weight of possibility pressed down on him. Every eye in the room, every breath, every silent expectation seemed to converge on him. "You will perform not just for me, not just for the audience, but for yourself," the director continued. "Play as if this is the only moment that matters. Leave nothing behind." Alex swallowed hard. He could feel the tension in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had faced challenges before, but this one felt larger, heavier, and more personal. He approached the stage, every step deliberate, carrying with him the lessons of the past days: courage through fear, honesty in performance, and the power of embracing risk. As he sat at the piano bench, he paused, letting his hands hover over the keys. He closed his eyes and drew a deep breath, centering himself. The room was silent, every performer frozen in anticipation, every shadow attentive. Then slowly he pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but it resonated deeply. The music began cautiously, each note deliberate, carrying with it emotion, memory, and intent. Alex felt the music moving through him, not just his fingers, but his entire being. It was more than a performance, it was an expression of everything he had experienced, everything he had risked, and everything he had learned. Gradually, the melody grew bolder. The notes rose and fell, weaving a story that was both personal and universal. Alex allowed himself to play honestly without holding back, letting each emotion guide the rhythm, each memory shape the harmony. Fear still lurked at the edges of his consciousness, but it no longer controlled him. He embraced it, using it to fuel the intensity and depth of his playing. Midway through the performance, he began to improvise. The music became unpredictable, alive, shifting and transforming as he allowed his instincts to guide him. Each chord, each flourish, each pause was a choice, a risk, a statement of courage. The other performers watched in silence, captivated. Even the director, who had rarely shown emotion, leaned forward slightly, eyes focused, absorbing every detail. Alex's heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from exhilaration. He had reached a point where the music was no longer just sound. It was a living conversation between him, the piano, and the room. Every note carried meaning, every pause carried weight, and every choice carried risk. He played faster, slower, louder, softer, bending the music to his will while allowing it to guide him as well. As the final section approached, Alex felt the culmination of everything he had learned. He played with abandon, letting the music flow freely, unrestrained by expectation or fear. The improvisation reached a crescendo, building to a powerful emotional peak. Every chord struck with precision and honesty. Every note resonated with courage and heart. The room was completely silent, holding its breath as the last chord approached. Alex pressed the final key, letting it linger, holding it until the sound faded into the quiet. For a moment there was nothing but stillness. The audience, the performers, even the director seemed suspended, caught in the intensity of the moment. Then, slowly, the room erupted in applause. It started softly, almost hesitantly, but it quickly built into a wave of sound that filled the theater. The performers clapped, some with wide eyes, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Crew members who had been quietly observing cheered, unable to contain their admiration. And the director, the most discerning and demanding figure of all, finally stood and clapped with deliberate force. His eyes met Alex's, and for the first time there was no trace of judgment, only recognition, respect, and something like pride. Alex stood, chest heaving, sweat dampening his shirt. He felt a mixture of relief, exhilaration, and quiet triumph. He had faced the ultimate challenge, taken the greatest risks, and expressed himself honestly and fully. The applause, though powerful, was secondary to the knowledge that he had played truthfully, without holding back, without fear, without compromise. The director approached him slowly, studying him as if weighing every detail. "This," he said finally, "is what happens when courage, honesty, and talent come together. You have faced fear, risked failure, and played with everything you have. Remember this moment, because it is the foundation for everything to come." Alex nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude and humility. Words were inadequate. He had been tested, challenged, and pushed to his limits, and now he understood something profound: the power of music, the value of courage, and the importance of authenticity. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Other performers attempted to rise to the challenge, inspired by Alex's performance. Some succeeded, some faltered, but everyone was moved by the courage it took to play honestly, without holding back. The theater vibrated with energy, creativity, and determination, each person discovering something new about themselves and their craft. Between rehearsals, Alex wandered through the empty theater, letting the echoes of his performance linger. He touched the piano keys, feeling the cool, familiar surface beneath his fingers. He reflected on the journey, the challenges, the risks, the moments of fear, the moments of triumph. Each had been essential, shaping him into someone capable of facing uncertainty and embracing possibility. By evening, the theater had emptied, leaving Alex alone with the piano once more. He sat down and played softly, not for an audience but for himself. Each note carried the lessons of the day, the emotions of the journey, and the courage that had been cultivated. The music filled the empty space, resonating deeply, carrying a sense of closure and completion. As he left the theater, the city lights stretched before him, faintly flickering against the darkening sky. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond applause or recognition. He had faced the ultimate challenge and emerged not just unscathed but stronger, braver, and more fully himself. That night, sleep came easily. His dreams were filled with music, light, and endless possibilities. He imagined stages stretching infinitely, notes cascading in endless patterns, challenges that tested him in new ways, and risks that demanded courage. And yet he felt ready. He understood now that the journey would never truly end, but he was equipped with the knowledge, the skill, and the bravery to face whatever came next. The next morning, Alex awoke with a quiet resolve. He knew the world beyond the theater would be full of expectations, judgments, and challenges, but he also knew something more important, that he had discovered the power of his own courage, the depth of his honesty, and the strength of his talent. And with that, he could face anything. He stepped into the day with confidence, carrying the music within him, carrying the lessons of the theater, and carrying the unshakable knowledge that he had dared to play, dared to risk, and dared to be truly seen. The journey had been long, the challenges had been immense, but the reward was greater than he could have imagined. He had not only played music, he had discovered himself. And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the streets, Alex walked forward with a sense of purpose and freedom, knowing that the courage to play honestly, to risk failure, and to embrace truth would guide him for the rest of his life.